Hello and welcome to today's Magnetic Muse episode. This is the Doing It for the Daughters series. I'm your host, Jessica Ann, and I am joined by my co host, Sunshine Marie. Today, we are exploring, actually, this is a two-part series where we are looking at sexual authority and inner authority. And in part one, which is today's session, we are looking at how are women conditioned to betray their sexual boundaries. And in part two, which will be next week, we're looking at how do we reclaim them. So, Sunshine, this is a subject really close to your heart. Tell us what you've been thinking about recently.
Absolutely. So I have been doing a lot of thinking about just like my sovereignty in general. Cause like you were saying, like, yes, we're talking about sexual authority, but this applies to inner authority, like overall, just because like the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. If it's showing up as a pattern in one area of your life, it's probably showing up across the board. And so just a lot of like tracing my own pattern back on my own patterns back and thinking about, where certain mindsets came from and how I may be inadvertently giving power over to external means just through, societal programming, family, religion, trauma, dating culture, attachment wounds, all of those things, impact whether or not I'm operating in my sovereignty. And so I just been thinking about that from like a sexual perspective in the ways that I have been conditioned to give over my power and how I'm reclaiming that and making sure that I have all of my parts with me at home.
Beautiful. So, as you say, many women, many of us are conditioned to outsource our authority over our bodies, our desires, and our boundaries. So, one of the things that we began exploring, and when you brought this subject, was how we can confuse being desired with being valued. Should we begin there?
Yes. Yes. Society definitely makes it easy to believe that a woman's value lies in how beautiful she is, how attractive she is, how desirable she is. And, if men want to be with her and if she's, um, often encouraged to compare herself to other women. And that's kind of like the general ideal about how a woman's worth is derived if you're looking at media and things of that nature in order to get like your ideals about that. And I mean, really, if we're watching TV at all, like it's programming us whether we want it to be or not. That information is getting within us. And there is kind of like these collective agreements around, women who are considered more beautiful being more valuable, women who are considered, more desirable, having access to more things, being given more opportunity and things of that nature. So it's very easy to confuse, okay, well, what is me being desired look like versus what is actually being valued look like?
I think that's really powerful. And I also think from my own experience last year in particular with A Ghost of Lovers Past, my big lesson was confused the way, and I hadn't been aware of the way that I unconsciously had connected attention or confused attention with intimacy or desire with emotional connection. And so talk me more about this idea of value
Yeah,
and
so I mean, luckily for me, I'm great in bed. And a lot of times, people will really get attached to that aspect and like really appreciate that aspect and like never go away. So they can always have access to that, right? And so, you kind of get this egotistical, they can't leave me alone kind of vibe or whatever, but it's all based in like this physical energy and this boost that they get from being with you that really has nothing to do with your intrinsic value, who you are, what you desire. A mutual connection, evolution, improvement, betterment in any kind of way. It's just about that temporary moment of lust or satisfaction. And so, not confusing those two things. And not to say that one is more important than the other, but you want to have both of those aspects in the picture and you don't want to confuse them for one another.
I think what I'm smiling at there is beautiful because it's that thing about, and this is what I said to him, and I kind of made mistake by trying to create deep intimacy and um conversation to go deeper than the surface with somebody who wasn't available for that. So that was where I went wrong. But I'm bringing up your point because it was this thing where I said to him, because I was going through deep introspection last year of this, all of this uncovering. And I was like, I realized I've led with my sexuality my whole life. I can do that. And I said I want something different. I want like deeper intimacy and connection.
That
And
at 59?
pardon?
Is that
It
59?
is that 59, but it's what you're talking about. It's the physical, there's a physical, but where does it go? And if we as women lead with the physical, we often get a very surface level connection. That we don't get that deeper bonding. I think it's bonding versus physical desire. Okay. So another thing that we discussed and that you brought up was this idea around prioritizing connection over self-trust. Talk us
Yes.
through this.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that theme throughout my life. Feeling like there has to be something sacrificed in order to have connection, that people aren't just going to naturally, remain in connection with you, or you're not going to have a sense of belonging if you don't somehow give up some aspect of yourself. If we think about even just the way that we're taught sometimes to think about God, it's like, the general consensus, in my childhood was that, God is something outside of you, and that you need to meet these conditions in order to be loved and accepted by God.
Mm.
And so, like, that's the foundation of it, right? If that foundational relationship with your creator is, oh, there's got to be some action, something exchanged, then you start to think, okay, well, there always has to be a compromise of who I am and what I'm feeling, because they tell you that the thing you have to exchange is your human nature, right? That anything that you actually crave or following your desires and things like that is evil, and it leads you into temptation and all of these things, like making you feel like, okay, well, you have to give up this aspect of yourself. You have to sacrifice this part of yourself in order to be connected to God. And so I think that's kind of like the foundational aspect of that theory for me, but then it spills over into my relationship, first with your caretakers. If you behave a certain way, which may not be the way you want to behave, then, you're welcomed in, you have a sense of belonging. And then if you step outside of what they expect from you, or express desires that aren't aligned with what they want for you, then that connection, in my case, was taken away to some aspect, you know what I'm saying? Of like, oh, well, go to your room, or, being even, physically disciplined and things of that nature, of like, and which does disconnect you from the person that's disciplining you whenever you use, physical discipline or whatever. So just that whole concept built around the idea that, okay, well, I have to give up something that I want in order to remain connected to the people that I love.
Right. So what we're talking about is how we first learn to self-abandon, and then how this becomes hardwired in as a nervous system imprint that becomes a pattern that actually informs every action or maladaptive way we then show up in relationship to remain loved. So when love was conditional as a child, we internalize these patternings of how we learn to remain connected or to belong. So, how has this showed up for me? I mean, I'm thinking back through relationships. I think the key one that I learned last year as I how I developed the rewire your desire system, and it was so painful to because I was able to see the split, the internal split of overriding my intuition and what I knew and ignoring the external reality, but then the internal child within was creating the fantasy bond or the story to not feel the pain. So while that person would pull away further and show me through action the lack of interest or the lack of capacity, whatever the reasoning before that, there was there was a distance and a pulling away, and that is not a mutual reciprocal connection or someone a man who was showing me. And the thing is, I with this particular person, I knew him 10 years before, and I knew him as the hunter. he pursued deeply. So I've known two sides of him. And I knew him when he began pulling away the first time, when ultimately he was married, which I didn't know. But the thing was, rather than at that point being able to say, this is not meeting me where I need to be met, thank you very much, and moving on, I began to show up through the patternings of trying to chase, trying to connect, trying to bridge and fix the connection, showing up, maybe trying to make myself more desirable. There was all these ways that I was trying to prove my value. And that is one example, a real concrete example of how how we as adults and adult women can, until we do that internal work and until we catch it, can actually self-abandon to try and maintain that connection. And that is how I actually developed the Rewire Your Desire system as well. So just to put that in there, everyone who's listening. And I know that you have, how do you work with this in your work? How do you help women to solve that in your work?
So, um, a lot of what I do is centered around helping people to recognize their patterns and being able to identify how those beliefs were ingrained in them so that they can shift their belief system around, those particular things. And um, a lot of the assigning of meaning that we do, being becoming like more aware of that as well.
I think that again, that is such a foundation and such an important one, because the script. So when we are, again, it comes down to that these things become very loud. The urge to self-abandon becomes super, super loud when you are internalizing a meaning to somebody else's behavior. So rather than, oh, that person's not got the capacity, or that person's just not interested, like, which is fine. Like, I'm half the time not interested in people that are interested in me, and it doesn't mean anything about them. It just means that's where I'm at. But when you're in the thick of things, you're like, I'm unlovable. I'm not being chosen. And that's the wound. So look at, what is the meaning? What am I making this mean? And getting to the core of that will be the liberation. Okay. So, and I think as well, they are, for me, it was meeting that very, very deep core wound of abandonment and rejection, like a deep fear of this. And, it starts in. So, this one, you did an amazing post on this the other day. Confusing chemistry with alignment or attraction.
Yeah, I think that's one of like my major breakthroughs that I had once I realized that my body can be going crazy and I can be feeling all the feels and have all the sparks and everything, and that could actually mean run. That could be my body just sending whatever signal it possibly can to tell me that this is go the other way. You're not safe.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
So just being able to, understand, think a little bit of what we were talking about last week of as far as like the way that our attraction is set up is just based on our patterns. Whatever however our patterns are set up, that is what is gonna attract into our sphere of like what we're already used to, what our current version of ourselves is willing to accept, what we've seen in the past, and all of those things is what's gonna bring things to you. So you have to have some type of system to say, okay, yes, I feel this attraction and all of this chemistry, but what do I use to measure whether or not there's alignment? It can't just be the emotions and sensations.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. And again, it was definitely something that I learned and embodied in real life experience last year, where this person, what I actually learned in on this particular issue as well, was that so when so in November I called in the sacred year. I was like, I'm ready. I finally realized actually my years of celibacy, even though useful, had come to it, the cycle had come to an end. And my spirit and my soul began to say, there's something deeper here now. It's not actually, yes, that period was useful, but actually, there's something deeper. There's a desire. There's a desire for actual intimate connection now, and desire for actual conscious partnership. But what I had to then go through, as I call it, the underworld, was a journey of realizing that I was still imprisoned and still in a deep sense of protection, which I had no conscious awareness of. So this being single still and being, and it was timing. That period of time was necessary for me to reclaim sovereignty, to know myself, to understand my own energy, my own desires, who I was, and grow in that time of evolution. But it also highlighted and illuminated there was a big part of my psyche that had done this because I was still protecting myself from intimacy that I desired, from conscious relationship, from being seen, being held, being met. And it was deeply rooted in the father wound, which is another aspect of the father wound, which I've now begun building this beautiful body of work around because I understand it so deeply. And so many high achieving women think they are not wanting partnership, they're not wanting connection. Actually, you're just really, really loaded with emotional armor because every single relationship you've had has been searching for that lost part of the father connection that you didn't have. And when you look back and you don't, and maybe there's an element of self-trust as well. There was a big thing like, oh, well, look back at my attraction, my desire, and it's always been a certain type of man, a very dangerous or dysfunctional type of man. Can I really go out now and trust myself to connect again? But coming back to this attraction and confusing chemistry with alignment, what I found was, as I said before, and I think I said it in a previous episode, when he came back, the surge of sexual desire, the surge of attraction was, I've not experienced that for so long. It was a rush and it was like burning in my root chakra and in my sacral chakra. And it felt like a burning, it felt like I was purging all of that. Like if we talk about the calcified pineal gland, it was like my sexual desire had been calcified. It was like, and it was just like coming back online, coming that force. And so for days, like my pussy was wet and dripping. It was open and ripe. And for days I was like, oh my God, like I'm ready, ready. Oh, this is the one. But rather than just saying this is desire and attraction, I'm like, the mind attached meaning to that. And it was like, this is my soulmate. This is the man. He's come back. I'm gonna. So there was that. That was step one. Step two was then this an urgency and anxiety to just go and see him to get basically
Mm,
my fucking cock. But it was like so strong. And days I had this energy that was pulsing. So on one hand, it was good because it reminded me that for so long I hadn't had that feeling of desire. But it taught me a lesson about what safe attraction is versus this sort of chemistry. Because what I realized after my experience was it was actually a trauma bond. He had betrayed me the first time. And everyone around me, when I said, hey, blah, blah's come back, every single person said to me, this man hurt you. Like, do you not remember how you, because I was like, honestly, I've never been like this before, but as I said, I've said it in a previous episode, I would walk around crying. Like I would be in a supermarket and I would just start crying and days and months, probably 2 years of absolute mourning for just being completely abandoned from this guy. Now, and how it all happened. So I'm not going to go into the whole story, but the point is that was a trauma bond and it was a betrayal bond that I was not. And when he came back, I didn't see any of that. I couldn't remember any of that. All I could remember was the love that I had and this emotion and this connection. So what I found as it went on and he wasn't, and anyway, the connection showed me that really I was probably in limerence more than anything. Um, the emotional lack of emotional availability, the inconsistency, the lack of it, the mixed signals, all of these things, I could see what was going on, but it still led me to behave in a certain way, which I was leading for. So what I found by the end of it was that this was a nervous system attraction based on a trauma bonded imprint. So I was trying to seek relief from the person who hurt me. And that was the same imprint when, like you are disorganized, I was, and I'm not going to claim that identity because I don't
Right.
believe it's an identity that I truly don't. I don't believe it's who I am. I believe it can perhaps show up, but I can't imagine this would happen in the next connection that I have because I feel that I've done this work. So we'll see, and we'll talk about it as it arises. But like people with all people with disorganized attachment, that very first caretaker, we get confused that love with pain, and that becomes wired. And that's why I call it rewire your desire, because and you guys all know the story if you follow along. At the very beginning, my higher self and my angel said to me, "Here are two men, and you're going to rewire your desire," which is why I call it. And I had, and I, and I went down the path to learn that lesson and embody it, so that I could bring that wisdom and the medicine back. Um,
Yeah.
so that's really my understanding and experience of that. But go on, yeah.
Absolutely. I think a couple things came to me as you were talking. One of the analogies that, I use is, say I want to become a pilot, right? Of course, I could just like go hop in a plane, crash it a couple times, figure out, doop, 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 press some buttons, figure it out. Like I'm intuitive like that. I'll eventually figure out how to file that pain. But I mean, there might be a lot of pain and a lot of harm and a lot of destruction in the process, right? Whereas I could go a different route and like go to school and have someone instruct me. And, it may be more arduous and have to like take a longer process, and maybe I could figure it out quicker if I just go press the buttons. But what's the opportunity, the cost of that, so it's just like pacing becomes so important. That's why it's so important, even though you're feeling all of the sparks and the fireworks and your pussy's on fire and you want and you just want to go. It can be so beneficial sometimes to just hold off on that aspect of the relationship so that you can clearly see patterns. Because one thing I think that we sometimes don't realize about sex is it's literally designed to help you overlook people's flaws. Like that's the purpose of it, to bond you to one another person and to give you almost like these rose-colored glasses so that you can tolerate them, right? And so it's like you don't want to get into a space like that with the person when you haven't really evaluated their intentions and their patterns and made an assessment of whether or not you're actually aligned with that person and they're going to help you to move closer to your purpose, and whether or not the lessons that you learn with them are going to be learned through pain and fear or through love with ease.
This is where the whole high value woman agenda comes from. That this whole
Mm,
what the word I'm looking for, but this whole high value woman thing. So when you're really, what we're really learning when when you're suddenly like your soul is like, oh, I want to be a high value woman. What we're really learning is, how do I actually develop this kind of restraint and this pacing and these feminine power ways of coming back into our own power and our own sovereignty. It's how do we do that? But I definitely want to touch on what you've just what I realized. Not only is pacing the key for my next, I was going to say my next escapade, but my next my next adventure. Um, and especially because this time I'm not dating at all for just for just, for just sex. Like, I want a long-term connection, and so, when I literally go out and meet somebody, I'm not jumping into any sex with that person, so there will be pacing. And courtship, like, that is another thing, which is not something that I ever had in my previous life. It was always just by default and always give stuck that 59, jumping in with the physical, and that's why, partly, I didn't have the relationships that I wanted. But anyway, that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to say is that I felt like I found a distinction for myself on what true safe attraction is versus intensity. So the intensity, I think, for me, is that surge. When that surge, I know that's a nervous system pattern. As you said, oh, run, that's a sign to run. And when I'm attracted and it's safe, my pussy speaks. So I get aroused, my clit is like turned on. And that is very different. It's very subtle as well. It's very like, held. It's so arousal and as attraction is steady, whereas intensity is showing me this is karmic, this is a trauma bond, this is something's familiar that your body remembers as love, but it's not. So that's one distinction I found as well for me.
Absolutely, and like I said, that pacing gives you the opportunity to discern between which one is which, especially if you haven't, like, specified the sensations.
Mm.
Because like I was saying in that post, I think for me, I had just gotten so used to, like, the highs of my nervous system and always being in survival mode and always being, hyper, vigilant and, just on 10, that some of those more subtle, soft signals of safety, I didn't even feel them. Because they just weren't as intense as, the other ones that I was accustomed to, so it took a while for me to reconnect with my body in a way that I was even able to feel the more subtle urges, the soft, hear the gentle voice, because my nervous system is like, "Oh, finally, we don't have to scream at her, we can just whisper."
Yes. And yeah, and that's where those embodiment practices come in, the presence and way of life. And that is the deconditioning. I think something interesting on a human design level here as well. I mean, we're going to move into actually, well, let's move into this. So, one of the things and the points that you raised as we were thinking about this episode, and it was really powerful because it's incredibly important, is how we as women treat discomfort like something we have to push through.
Yeah.
So, what does that mean? Like fear based compliance or coercive conditioning?
Yeah, so I can speak for me personally where this came from for me, and unfortunately where what a lot of women experience is, the first times that we have sex is not consensual,
Mhm.
and there's some level of association that we make at that time that it's not, sex is not going to be something that's comfortable or pleasurable or um centered around me at all. This is about this other person and, their pleasure, right? And so,
Mm.
um, I even got to a point where I would dissociate.
Yeah.
So if I wouldn't, I would start feeling that discomfort and I know it was coming and I would just dissociate and whatever happens, happens and I'll come back into my body when it's over. So, it just became natural for me to kind of like override those signals as they came up because that's how I was introduced to sex. And so it's just like always a level of discomfort and ickiness to it, for me, so I just always felt like I needed to push through that, like, "Oh, it'll be okay, I just need to loosen up, I might be overthinking it, I don't wanna kill the mood," those kinds of things instead of going with, I might just need to take myself out of this situation."
And that's again, I guess, another angle of how we self-abandon through this conditioning.
Mhm.
This is less along those lines, but still something to consider. When I was studying human design, when we learn about the open sacral people, the projectors, the manifestors, the reflectors, what we learn is that our sexuality is always conditioned. So whichever partner we are with is actually conditioning how we show up in that sexual experience. And our sexual uh libido and our desire is also conditioned by the partner that we are with. So I just thought that was really cool to think about as well for some reason.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And I mean, when I even I've heard that, and I just haven't, been able to, like, verify it through my experience, you know what I mean? A lot of times when you hear something from human design, you're like, "Oh, yeah, I identify with that deeply," and that's just one of those things. I was like, I don't know." Or maybe it's just because of my point of attraction, everybody that I've had in my energy was just so similar in that nature that I don't see the nuance.
I've definitely had different partners bring out different aspects of me, and how and have really beautiful sex that was just out of this world. And in fact, the projectors that I've had were just so boring. Like I found it was just like like when you have magnets and they just don't connect. It was just like, ugh, the energy was not the same. But when I've been with generator lovers, especially two particular generators that were my favorites, outstanding. So I don't know, and it's not something I've really explored in
That
depth.
could be it too, because I mean, I don't know for sure, but I don't think I've ever dated anyone else who was a projector.
Yeah, I had one for 9 years. Yeah, which was interesting. Now I look back and I'm like, oh, he's a projector. In fact, the Ghost of Lovers Past last year was a projector, and he was amazing. So he was one of my favorites. So actually, that doesn't hold out. It's not true. So, but yeah, that 9 year one was just like just wherever you
All
are.
I can think about is like, you hear people in movies or like if you break one of the little superstitions, they're like, you're gonna be cursed to 7 years of bad sex. You
I kept yeah, I kept trying to go what I kept doing though, I kept trying to condition him, because I kept trying to, like, bring it back to but I guess it just one I guess this is the key, we weren't sexually compatible, and this is another thing about, like, either being in relationship by default and being just walking through life unconsciously, or actually consciously saying, "These are things that are non-negotiable to me." Like, now, like, what I go into, sexual that connection, that sexual compatibility is number one on my list. I need somebody who can meet me in that way, in that depth, and how I like what I like. Whereas in the past, I just accepted for 9 years something. In fact, I actually went out of the relationship many times because I needed to be satisfied. So this is, I think, a big thing for many people, that they don't consciously enter it. They stay for reasons. I don't know why we stay. Maybe it's companionship, maybe it's security, maybe it's whatever, but we're not fulfilled. And what I want is a fulfilling, meaningful relationship that I can cultivate with someone. And like, yeah, yeah, I would never stay with someone now who wasn't compatible with me in that way. And on many ways.
Yeah, that again, that belief that something has to be sacrificed in
Yeah,
order to maintain connection.
yeah,
And, thinking about, in even still in my dating experience, like, if you're on any type of app, like, a lot of guys just kinda lead with sex, and it's almost like, an expectation for you to be okay with that, right? And there's a version of me that would be like, "Oh, you gotta kinda entertain that part of them in order to, get to anything beyond that or whatever." But at this point, it's like, if you bring up sex within the first few conversations, Imma just let you roll on about where you going because we just don't have the same ideals or the same intentions in this whole, situation or whatever. But I hate when I see things like, "We grown." Like, I hate that phrase. Like, a lot of men be, like, and they're, "Oh, we grown, come on," and, like, all the pressure and things like that and feeling like, "Oh, you have to push through that." You never do. At any point you feel like there's any type of pressure or discomfort or anything around sex that you not with, give it a no.
yeah, exactly. And again, it comes back with that conscious, intentional, and deliberate dating, whereas and which comes with that a certain level of being a sovereign woman, and coming into this with, this is what I need. These are my non-negotiables. This is who I am, rather than this default thing. Um, I think what's really interesting is this concept of performing openness instead of honoring your clarity.
Yeah, I think for me, I learned to, just kinda, like, act cool when what I really needed was honesty. Like, how we kinda end up in situationships where it's like you don't wanna push the envelope or disrupt the connection by asking questions or being too curious or putting any pressure for what you want, even though the other person has no problem putting pressure for what it is that they want, and you wanna, be open and, understanding and all of these things when you really actually want clarity. You're not okay with the ambiguity. Um You avoid some of the basic questions that you wanna ask because you don't wanna seem needy and, even, like, trying to shed the idea of being prudish because you don't wanna seem stuck up, and it's just like, you don't have to perform or pretend to be or feel any other way than who you actually are, and if you're in connection with someone and you don't feel comfortable asking the questions that you wanna know the answers to, that's a red flag. And it's not even necessary to say that there's something with that person, but more so something to look at within yourself of like, okay, why is it that I wanna know these things, but I'm not comfortable bringing up these conversations, or I don't wanna ask? What's behind that?
Yeah. And this is a really interesting one that I looked at. So remember in November, I said, I want conscious partnership. So I'm ready for a different type of experience with masculine now. I'm ready for something that I've not really experienced. I've done so much evolution. I have never really allowed myself to be intimate and vulnerable and allowed myself to
Mhm.
be provided for, to be held, to be met. I've to yeah, to finally actually have a conscious connection, a conscious partnership. And so the ghost of lovers past that turned up. So he was the one that I actually felt that for the first time in my whole life when I was 30, I was like, "Oh my god, like this is like," because I was avoidant. I was in my career, I was in my huntress, my wounded huntress. As I've said in the previous episodes, I was happy to have you to come, please me, and go home, and I live my life. I was not attached to anyone. I didn't have the desire for relationship at all. For me, in fact, I had this big belief that relationships were just draining. I had to compromise. I liked my freedom. Freedom was a big thing. And it's that responsibility, that 50, that gene key 50
Mhm.
again, which is actually my Venus. It's in my EQ, twice in Pluto. So not only did it show up as holding me back in business because either I was overcommitted or I was didn't want any responsibility at all. So swinging this pendulum, it showed same thing in relationship. Either I wanted very, very casual and don't come into my like, please. And obviously they wanted more because I'm just like so detached. Or I was just being the cool girl and it actually was very, very good for them, you know, because they could go around live their life. So it was this dynamic of when I met the Ghost of Lovers Past in that original first time, and the thing was, we had actually agreed that it was just a sexual connection, that it was an agreed situationship because I actually had a partner who was somewhere else at the time. So, I I was like, okay, yeah, cool, that will satisfy, that will work for me. And But I fell in love because I got bonded because he was at my house every day because he was treating me like his wife, like his basically his wife.
Because that's what sex is designed for.
Right, all of our friends were. I was introduced to his friend group. He was in my. We were going out for my birthday. Like it got very murky. So, and we booked the holiday to Thailand. So it was like we're operating like, and then he's like, okay, I'm leaving and I'm going back. And it was February the 14th, Valentine's Day. I'm going back to raise my son. Okay. But what I'm saying is that I realized, having done the work last year, was that I had lived so oft. The reason why he came back after 10 years was because he wanted that version of me, the cool girl, the girl who was detached, but didn't, not detached in a way of I'm in my feminine power and I know my worth and our connection, but not detached from a polarity position, but detached because I didn't have any needs and he didn't have to rise to meet anything. So he got access without responsibility, without commitment of a connect. He got my warmth. In his words, our connection is unmatchable. Your warmth, I craved your warmth, your affection, because that was what he said to me when he said, my life is evolving every day and ultimately I can't be the man that you want. I can't give you, because this time I went very clear. I want commitment. I want a relationship. Like I don't want a situationship. But guess what? The reason I mention all this is because when he couldn't give me that, rather than walking away, I said, well, okay, I negotiated my needs. I was like, well, okay, let's just have sex then. So that's again, it's this thing of self-abandoning, like, okay, well, I can't have what I want, so I'm not gonna actually make him rise, and I'm gonna bring my standards down. So I'm not leading from my standards, I'm leading from a distorted version of desire, which is rooted in self-abandonment to maintain the connection. No man is gonna rise for you when you do that anyway. Like, but I did, so the thing is, I made my needs clear, and he obviously couldn't meet them, and so I became I kind I but I didn't enter a situationship. We actually just met a few times. I was, like, going wild with I was, like, texting, like, essays on everything, and "You're like my father, and I'm having this awakening." This guy's like, "I can't even deal. I don't give a fuck." So yeah, that's what I learned though. And what I learned was that I'm not going to be the cool girl and I'm not going to be in a situationship. So even though I had to go through this death and rebirth process and meet those very, very ancient wounded parts, he's not the man. He was the catalyst. He was the mirror to awaken all of those things with me to make me whole. I would say make me whole again through my process of being dismantled and rebuilt, but he wasn't the man that was gonna hold me. And, the next man I meet who is open for commitment, relationship ready, he may open up. There may be other things that are ready to be seen, patterns, but in a relationship where you're both consciously choosing it, of course, you're going to hold space for that. And I'm not gonna put it all on here. I learned a lot from that experience as well. I'm not gonna pour my emotional shit onto this person. I'm gonna probably be a bit more quiet about it. But I imagine the person that I meet next will actually have the emotional maturity and that
Capacity.
capacity to be able to have conversations around it as well. Because that's what I was trying to create with him as well. I thought that by being honest and transparent, 59, it would create openness for discussion and compassion. I mean, he did in some ways have compassion, he just didn't have the capacity, and he didn't want a relationship. But it comes back, so yeah, performing openness instead of honoring clarity. This time I wasn't performing openness, but I was messy. I was emotionally flooding him, I guess, or what's the word I'm looking for? Dumping, like emotionally dumping all
Yeah.
this. Um, and I wasn't um I didn't have a fear of being judged by him. I was, so it was loose. Again, I think I'm a woman of extremes. I'm either very controlling
Same.
or very like, "Mwah." And now I'm like, this time I'm gonna be really
Yeah,
nice.
I was thinking that same thing when you were talking about that. It's like either, for me for a long time, I was on either one end of the spectrum. Either I'm like oversharing, telling this man every emotion that I have, every thought that comes to mind, everything that you can think of that that person didn't have the capacity for, or I'm completely shutting that off and I just want to be the fun girl and and all these other things. But I think, for me that comes at a place of being taught that likability is more important than authenticity. But something that really hit me once I learned it is that, performing and showing up as anything other than your authentic self is a block for love.
Yeah.
Because even if you show up and the person loves the version of you that shows up, it's not you. And so you're not going to be able to receive whatever love it is that they're putting out because it's not even you. It's some phantom that you've created in some, role that you're playing. And so you're not going to receive it as love because it's not for who you really are authentically. So the best thing that we can do for ourselves in connection is to show up authentically, and either you like it how it is or you don't.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think what's really important to bring up is this idea of performative liberation as well. As I said,
Mhm.
as that year unfolded at the beginning of the year, I was saying to him, because in my my processing, I was like, I've been that woman all these years where I've just performed, like, the mask was I'm sexually liberated. I was a pole dancer when I was 22 because I was leading from this belief of I love to perform, and I do. I'm a Leo rising. I was very in like sexuality and sensuality, and that side of me is a part of me that wants to be expressed. But is it safe to express it in either being paid in a transactional way? Like, was that the best? Was that really true? Or is it because I was trying to reclaim control of having been violated and having been sexually abused and having sexual trauma and rape and multiple things that many of our listeners are going to have gone through? Was that a way of reclaiming my sexual power in a way of saying, well, I'm going, and I told you, I think I said it on another post ages ago, where having been raped in 2018 by an intimate partner, and this is even like that coercive, just because you're in a relationship, when you say no and they fucking push that shit and they force you to have sex, it's rape. It is not, you do not have to give your body. That is a boundary being violated. And what I did, I went, when I was in Thailand, I was like, I'm gonna reclaim my intimacy and my sexual power. I'm
Mm.
gonna do a tantra retreat. So I go and I pay for this tantra retreat, and I'm standing there naked, so looking at all these motherfuckers, and I'm like, I don't want these bitches touching me. I need to get out of here. So in that moment, I did at least not abandon myself and go through with it. But it was again this same idea that actually the only way that I can reclaim my sexual power or sovereignty or authority is to put myself in a situation. Is that performative liberation? And as well with, oh, I'm just gonna have situationships. I'm just gonna have multiple partners. No, it's probably a form of protection and defense from actually allowing the love in that you don't believe that you're capable of, like, because when I looked at it last year on a deep level, which is why my work is, honestly, I'm blown away by the work that I get to deliver in the receptivity codes and rewire your desire, because of the depth that I've experienced and disseminated this work on an embodied level, and understanding those patterns and being helping women to actually come back into power and wholeness and sovereignty.
Mm.
I learned that those days were not really about being sexually liberated. They were really masking a deep fear of abandonment, a deep fear of rejection, a deep internalized belief that I had to earn love. So performing, and that I wasn't good enough. That, so when you have a deep lovability wound, and you might say, "Oh no, I'm in my power. I'm because I was. I didn't know." But it's only when you realize, when you start to look back at all of your relationships, look back, look at the patterns. Have you ever been chosen? Have you ever had a man propose to you? Have you ever? You have, but I haven't. Have you had a man introduce you to his family? No. So look at why your relationships are mirroring something about what is really going on about your beliefs, about your value, your self-worth, your lovability. Because when I look back, it wasn't really liberated. And what I'm going to be moving into, which is why I'm so excited about having my next partner, because I'm so excited about reclaiming my sexuality. It's something that I loved early on, and with good partners that I did have safe connection with, although they weren't my partners. And again, it's this accepting, like, the two men that I really ever wanted, they had partners elsewhere. That one of them I knew he was a booty call from the age of 14 up until, I guess, I don't know, 20 something, like late 30, like, yeah. And he came back last year as well, and he got shut down. It was like, no, I'm not available for this anymore. Again, it's like when you realize, what am I actually we did this in our mastermind the other day. Like, what am I tolerating, and how is this? Can I use that? Do you mind if I talk about the
Yeah, for
projection
sure.
personality? So we were talking about identity shifts and the foundations of how we recreate reality. So we got to look at it like this: that we have an expansive part of consciousness called the magician, which is where we can actually recreate and access limitless possibility or infinite possibility or our future self version. But often we are creating and recreating our reality from living from the saboteur or the logician consciousness, the part of us, the survival archetype that is um, basing our current reality on how safe we are and what is already known. So it's very difficult to create the new and break out if you're leading from this consciousness. And what happened, and the analogy I was using was, it's like we go to a theater. Our life is a theater, and we can go to this theater and we can put any movie into this projection screen, and it will come up, and that will be the next part and the next thing. But if we are leading from this saboteur, the projection screen is always based on the past. So if my past experiences are with men that are unavailable, or I don't believe that I'm lovable, I'm going to recreate that experience. To break that, I need to move out of my comfort zone and move into my magician, who says, actually, I'm going to shift and call in this future version and bring back. And in the present, I'm going to break the pattern and begin to create the new identity. Again, the work we do in Rewire Your Desire. It's an identity shift. Um, so how does that link with what I was talking about? I um I wasn't gonna go back. I don't know how that links, but I'm not going back.
Yeah, just to performing that liberation, and I also have been, like, on the other end of that where I was, like, um, performing that I was gonna be, like, this Stepford wife and fit into societal standards and, be, like, this soccer mom, and, that just really just was never my identity or anything that I've ever felt comfortable in. It was just who I felt like I was supposed to be being. I'm really more of, like, a artsy, quirky, kinda, Rolling Stone kinda gal.
Yeah.
And that's just, more aligned with who I am. I'm a free spirit, and that doesn't mean that, I didn't enjoy the time that I was married. It's just that I wasn't able to show up as my authentic self in that situation. And so that performative energy of, "Oh, this is the only man I ever want and I'm gonna ever wanna be with," when that just was never my truth. And so just being able to step outside of, "Okay, well, this is what's expected of me for me to be monogamous and be able to, settle down with one person and da 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 da," and being able to say, "You know what? If that's not what I want, if that's not genuine, if that's not honest, if that's not authentic to me, then it's okay for me to choose something else."
I think that's absolutely brilliant. And I want to even expand on this because I've got this internal kind of, I've always had this deep need for autonomy, and it is who I am, and freedom, and I'm a total free spirit. And that's one of the things he said to me last year. He was like, "Why are you like why do you want all this commitment and marriage and like because you're a free spirit. You've always been a free spirit." And it's true, I am. But like what I realized is that I can still be a free spirit, but in the context of a a monogamous relationship. Like for me, monogamy doesn't have to mean that I'm constricted. For me, it can actually mean it's like structure and feminine, right? Like I used to
Mhm.
think that having a structure and following like some form of structure. Well, that's why I ended up the 7 years and how I developed this new mastermind because what I found was actually my masculine was completely collapsed. So I hadn't created an internalized masculine that could hold my feminine. And so I was living in flow and I was again in the extreme. I was too much in my flow. But I don't believe a monogamous relationship when it's actually with somebody that you've chosen consciously. I believe I can now cultivate that desire, that going deep with somebody without having to feel constricted. To me, I can create adventure and freedom and expansion and difference in depth over time, everything like over and getting more and more and more depth. That's what I imagine. And that's what I want to experiment with this next phase. But and when I looked at my Venus sequence and I looked at my astrology, I found as well that all what I ha- is it confirmed and clarified you are a person who needs that freedom and that exploration and that adventure, but you are also someone who who actually wants deep devotion. Now, I'm not saying I can't have deep devotion with multiple partners. Maybe I will end up going down the route of getting married and saying, actually, this is not what I imagined. This conscious partnership thing is, and maybe I want to be poly. Like maybe that's what I want to experience, but I don't know. I'm open. I'm open to it all, but I'm open to it where there is devotion, where there's where there's reciprocity, where there is honesty, where there is connection, where there is emotional connection and depth. And what I wasn't going to get from him was that. So if he could have if we had met and there was, and I said that to you last week as well, that oh, it was such a shame that I wish I had met him this year, but I couldn't because the work needed to be done. Because
The
how
catalyst.
different, yeah, how different would it have been if I said, okay, this is this person's capacity, this is what I get from this connection. I have the most amazing sex with this person. Can I have can I honor what this connection is without needing the urgency and the confirmation that I'm being chosen? Because it was an I'm chosen wound. So how different would that have been? That's in some ways, that's not performing like that's what true liberation
Mhm.
is. It's when you're going in it with your like, do you see? There's a difference. So in the
That awareness, the consciousness.
yeah, so being a cool girl,
Mhm.
it's like, I'm gonna abandon myself and give you and even override my own desire to keep the connection, or actually, this is something really juicy and really beautiful and potent, and this is how we can meet each other. Let's see how we can experience and enjoy each other without having to make it mean something else.
Yeah, and I mean that's very much a space where I'm in as far as like being able to really evaluate the capacity of each of my partners and say, this is what this connection specifically the needs that I can have met here, these are the needs. And anything outside of that is me trying to make this person be someone that they're not and not being accepting of not only this person, but of myself and the choice that I made to be with this person. And understanding that it's okay that I have needs that can't be met within this connection. And there are other ways that I can meet those needs for myself and be like, completely comfortable, honest, open, and transparent about that instead of trying to force this one person to be all of these other things that I need when yes, I love this person. It's a beautiful relationship. We have a great connection. Everything is, very conscious as far as like understanding one another's wounds and what we're each evolving through. Both of us are in therapy. We journal, like it's like we're doing that thing, but I also know that there are certain needs that this individual just doesn't have the capacity to meet for me. And that doesn't mean that I have to abandon myself and not have those needs met. But it also doesn't mean that I have to try to force this person's hand to be someone that they're not or have a capacity that they don't actually have in order to meet those needs.
Brilliant. And I think the key and most important thing is that you're both conscious. This is what we're talking
Mhm.
about when we're saying conscious partnership. However that looks like for you, that might be monogamous, it might be multiple, but the fact that two people are consciously and intentionally meeting each other where they can with that honesty and vulnerability and doing their own individual work. And that's what interdependence is. So really we're moving out of the code. And that's what and I think people mistake monogamy or marriage with codependence.
Mhm.
That's not what I'm talking about when I talk about sacred union. I'm talking about what you're talking about, you know?
Two whole individuals coming together, not someone looking to be completed by
Yeah.
someone else.
I wasn't trying to be completed with him though. I was like, I want, I well, no, what I wanted was conscious partnership. Like, can we come together? And I wanted the commitment. Yeah, I did. I wanted commitment. I wanted that safety, but I don't think I saw it as him completing me. But he wasn't. I wanted to. I didn't want a situationship. Do you see? Like, yeah,
Yeah, and even I mean just like the core, the fundamental of codependency is that illusion that you need something outside of you for whatever it is that you wanna bring into your life or whatever it is that you wanna experience and, like, having that. outside dependency instead of being internally sourced for whatever it may be.
Yeah, and I think coming back to the beginning when I said the next relationship is gonna be very different, it was that the wounding part, the pattern of, like, outsourcing my emotional and,
Mhm.
expressing all these things to him, that was, um that's what the difference would be, where you'd be actually internally, like, which I've been most of my life, and I think that was the other thing that I was collapsing that as well. There was so many things going on that I was actually collapsing so many different parts of myself to try and it was so destabilizing. So I was collapsing the independent, the strong woman, the one who didn't need to be held, the overfunctioner, the emotional labor. And I was also like meeting the pain of the child who had been abandoned and wanting relief and all the things. It was very, very messy. Anyway, next week we are going to cover the second part of this episode, which is how do we then reclaim our sexual sovereignty? How do we show up? And this is kind of what we were talking or hinting and alluding to. Um, and I think the most exciting thing about next week for me is that we're going to begin by actually asking the question, where did we learn what sexuality is, where did we learn about that? Because I think that is fascinating, and I really have a lot to say about that, especially around porn and men and how they perform and what they think sex is when they're in their performative energy as well. um so that's a little hint at where we're going. And if you have listened this week and you're ready for next week, would love to hear questions. Love to hear your ideas on what you think sexual liberation or sexual sovereignty is, or experiences you've had where you've given away that power. Anything you'd like the listeners to finish on?
I think, just in listening to this episode, asking yourself, how do I personally give away my authority? Like, where is this showing up for me in my personal life? What's triggering me into it? Just challenge you to take a look at your own patterns and see where you have evolved already and the progress that you made and celebrate that. And then just be honest with yourself about where you still have room to move the needle.
Brilliant. And that you deserve a relationship with yourself where your body, your intuition, your truth, and your boundaries are safe with you. Thank you for listening. This is the Magnetic Muse. Goodbye.